Hello and a warm welcome to the 9th edition of the Eastern Himalaya Naturenomics Forum. Over the course of several years, an attempt has been made by the Balipara Foundation to bring together thinkers, doers, and people who can bring about a reimagining of how we look at nature in one of the still most preserved areas on the planet, which is in the Eastern Himalayas, and the conjunction of the boundaries of several nations. We have a unique opportunity this year where global attention has been focused not only by COP26, but by the fact that we have lived as humanity with a realization that there are certain challenges we have to all deal with together. We have been found wanting in certain parts, but we've also shown resilience, great alacrity, great understanding, and perhaps great hope in taking the challenges of a globe as a world together. There is a young generation out there, and that generation perhaps is now more tuned in to what these global challenges should be, perhaps more vocal, not only in how they understand it, but what they're willing to do about it. So we have the unique opportunity over the next 90 odd minutes to focus on a certain theme of this 9th edition of this dialogue, which is particularly on ecological diplomacy. We'll be talking about, of course, COP26, the build-up for the next session, which is going to happen in Egypt. We'll be talking about what are the commitments that have been made and how they specifically impact the areas of the Eastern Himalayas. And we'll be looking at the region in total through Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Bhutan, China, and India, understanding the ecosystems, understanding the concept of naturenomics and how nature has a value that if we undercut it, we lose, but if we grow it, it can have a manifold economic advantage. Joining us on the broadcast are people who not only know what they're talking about, but are in a position to influence both policy and hopefully action, and maybe inspire you sitting at home to take on this cause as well. Professor Jianchu is from the Kunming Institute of Botany in China. He is a person who has specialized in transboundary water governance, in landscape restoration, in ecosystem services, in agriculture, and he holds a PhD in soil science from the China Agriculture University. A great addition and a great voice to listen in on this very important topic. Ranjit Barthakur, who's the founder of the Balipara Foundation, our host through the course of this 2 to 3 days of sessions. He's, of course, a social entrepreneur. He has built together the concept along with his team of naturenomics, which we'll delve into. He also happens to serve as chairman of the FICCI's Northeast Advisory Council. Ambassador Shyam Saran is with us. He is a former Foreign Secretary of India and is the Prime Minister Special and has been the Prime Minister Special Envoy for Nuclear Affairs and, more importantly, climate change. He is a trustee of the World Wildlife Fund in India and is a member of the National Executive of FICCI as well. And for those of you who know, a Padma Bhushan awardee in India. Ambassador Tariq Ahmed Karim, he's director for the Center of Bay of Bengal Studies. He's joining us from Bangladesh. He's been a career diplomat. He's also been involved in figuring out key water sharing treaties. And if we talk about ecological diplomacy, perhaps that's the closest we are. And that includes sub-regional cooperation between Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal. Dr. Vibha Dhawan, Director General of TERI, is joining us on the broadcast also. She is a fellow of the National Academy of Sciences in India. She's been involved in policy work at the national and international level, and she's been a task force member of the Department of Biotechnology, the Biotechnology Industry Research Assistance Council, and the Biotech Consortium of India Limited. Sabir Hussain Chaudhry, who is a member of parliament in Bangladesh and honorary president of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, is also joining us in a short time. He's, of course, played a pivotal role, elected the first vice president of the Geneva-based Inter-Parliamentary Union's first standing committee on peace and international security. Let me quickly kick off these conversations and over the course of the next 90 minutes, give our panelists a chance to delve in. So, Ranjit ji, if I'm going to begin with you, and if you could unmute yourself as you start, just set up this conversation. When we are talking about ecological diplomacy, what does that really mean?
Thank you, and hi to everybody. Good evening. Thank you for joining us and supporting us for the 9th year running. Many of you have actually been with us throughout this whole journey What we've learned in a focused manner is that unless we diplomatically manage our boundaries, I don't think we can actually achieve all the targets that we set by various fora and fora. Recently concluded COP26 has real implications for all of us. We would like to focus on the ecological diplomacy around Bhutan, India, China, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Myanmar. So that is small enough for us to try and handle and big enough for us to try and experiment with what I would call a living life lab in the area of ecological diplomacy. Ecological diplomacy, we've done an article from Balipara Foundation in the Science magazine and specifically talked about India and China, saying that how do India and China work together in this area of ecological diplomacy where the sky is the same and there are no borders, and how do we actually diplomatically manage our waters, our glacial melts, our snows, and our forest tree line covers. We also talked about the modernity of delivering electricity and energy, and therefore this entire issue about creating dams, both in India, both in China, Bangladesh, and really what we do. To me, Bangladesh is closest to my heart in all of this, primarily because the downwaters, as I call it, of ecological diplomacy, if somebody has had to actually face the brunt of it, it is Bangladesh, whether it's a rising sea line, whether it's the rising rivers or the destruction of mangroves or the forest line coming down, and all the challenges that they have with humanity itself. So I think we specifically want at the end of this to say, if we are saying net zero, how will net zero across the borders help us in these 5 countries? 1. 2, how would we manage our waters, which is a bigger subject, but how would we water manage and at least monitor and display to all of us that this water is a real problem in terms of flooding and in terms of variation to the extent that it is possible to actually measure and monitor, which we've been able to do through various scientific organizations that we are members of, including a company called G-Stick in Rotterdam, who we work very closely on management of this water. Thirdly, we want to see how do we actually focus and clearly deliver reforestry. And reforestry to us would be the easiest delivery item from many perspectives, least of all being the one on carbon sequestration and on soil and water management at a ground level.
Ambassador Karim, ecological diplomacy, given what we've seen happen at the international level in Paris, which didn't work out very well, COP26, in which it's been complicated to say the least, and with a person experienced as you in water diplomacy, going through various countries, highly complex. How do we understand the lessons from COP26, sir? Ambassador Karim.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not quite sure whether COP26 addressed this question directly. They are still struggling with keeping the emissions down to the targets and how to sort of put pressure on the various efforts to do that, and how to reduce these emissions so that we will not go over the tipping point. I mean, we are not 5 minutes away from midnight. We are, I think, perhaps 2 minutes away from midnight now, because the target which was set previously of, that we must not exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius increase over the industrial level is going to happen much sooner than anyone had ever thought it. It's not because it was beyond the realm of the mind to grasp that logic. It was mainly because policymakers, business, everybody said, no, this will never happen. They believe they are cornucopians who believe that mankind has been able to solve so many problems, will solve it with their ingenuity. However, as I had a day-long seminar today at the university attended by our foreign minister, and it became very clear that climate change preoccupations are going to take center stage already. Uh, so whether has it addressed specifically water issues, I don't know. Now, water is the source of life. Let me start from there. That's a fundamental everybody can grasp. We sort of evolved from the waters, whether we are in a mother's tomb or before primordial life started. Our people in Bangladesh, for us, it is existential element. And our people are born on the waters, they die in the waters. They survive if there's enough water, they drown if there's too much water. And that is a perpetual problem that has marked, it's a blessing, but it can also be a curse. And this is a huge problem. Number two, so when Ranjit was talking about the eco challenges and mentioned water, I wrote down water thrice, 3 types of water that we are interested in. One is the river waters that we have to manage and share, which we have done an abysmally poor task of doing. That has connotations for various things. It has connotations for agriculture. It has connotations for forestry and maintenance of forestry. It has connotations for our keeping land or losing land. Every year, there are 40,000 people now for the last several years pouring into Dhaka city. They are climate change displaced persons internally. Now, the report of 2007 had predicted that Bangladesh could lose up to 20% of its coastline. And if that was correct, the latest IPCC report has basically reaffirmed that, tweaking some of the figures and the statistics, but 2007 report was on course. Nobody listened to it. Even the most capable government with all the capacity is not going to be able to tackle that. Whose problem do they become then? They become the problem of everyone. Human beings are like water. They find their way to a place where they can survive, and they will do that. Okay, so that was number one. Number two is the aquifers, the water we don't see, which is under the ground. All of us, whether here or in West Bengal, we have destroyed our aquifers. I go to the coastal areas. I was there just, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. So now it will be much worse. The tube wells, we have water all around us. There are a river flowing by, there's coastals, the sea line is there. There are long queues of people waiting for a water tanker to come from the city to give them fresh water. What more do you want to hear? Because the aquifers have become saline. Number three, the water in the oceans, the oceanic sphere, the Bay of Bengal. The Bay of Bengal basically is our home. We depend on the Bay of Bengal for a lot of things. Number one, and Ranjit, the second point you mentioned was forestry, the Sundarbans. That is where the nexus between the forestry and the Bay of Bengal comes in. It's the only existing largest tract of forest in this part of the world. But the entire Bay of Bengal coastal region, every country, every littoral had these mangrove forests. Why is it that they only survive now in a small stretch in Bangladesh and West Bengal, and a small, very, very small bit along the Arakan coast in Myanmar? Why has it disappeared everywhere else? I was recently in Goa, the mangrove forest there flourishing. I was, I've seen them elsewhere. I was in Gujarat and I've seen them there. Now, I asked a diplomat from a very powerful country recently that, the function of the Bay of Bengal when the cyclones hit us. And you have read about the recent cyclones in the last few years.
Yes.
What would happen if we did not have the Sundarbans? He looked at me and said, oh, the coastline of Bangladesh would change drastically. I said, exactly. Are you giving thought about what effect it will have on human habitation around that?
Yes.
what effect it will have on human employment and economic activities along that? Have you thought about what will happen to the change in the ecosystem in the oceanic, in the saline waters? Because keystone species are going, they feed on some nutrients which are produced by the mangroves.
Correct.
The mangroves are being displaced by city trees. So that means it's an assumption that the mangrove everywhere else along Thailand and Malaysia and Indonesia and Sri Lanka may have disappeared because of human activities, because of introducing non-indigenous forestry there for commercial or cash purposes.
Okay.
Just
to follow up with
anybody who's addressing that, all these in combination, when you're talking of eco-diplomacy, the climate is just climate change.
So let me just follow up with a question on that. So
1 second, let me complete it. Let me please complete my thought. When we talk of climate change, it is just one aspect of the ecosystem that we are talking about. Everything feeds into that. You can't do it in silos. And for God's sake, if we cannot get rid of the silos, we are not talking to each other. If we are not talking to each other, if we are not coming on a common ground, COP26 is a universe. For me to reach the universe, first I have to reach the moon. I'll stop there.
Okay, Master Karim, I just wanted to interject on that thought, because bringing this to your experience in water sharing diplomacy, does this factor in, has this ever factored in, or is simply about measuring Q6?
Has it factored in? That's what I've been, struggling and fighting for the last almost 30 years, and particularly since 2010, when our Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina went on that. I call that a game-changing visit, but now that is wearing somewhat thin. We said, look, let us stop talking about sharing. Can we please talk about basin management? And here we have a friend from China, from Kunming. He will understand it better. For me, an epiphanous moment was in January 1989 in Beijing, in the Water Resources Minister's office. There was a delegation from Bangladesh. I was the acting ambassador. I had accompanied them. And by way of starters, we are sitting across at the conference table before the actual formal discussions start. We have this, and Shyam would understand, you chit-chat a little. And to break the ice, I asked the Vice Minister, Excellency, how did you tame your river of sorrows? And he looked at us, he said in Mandarin, something which was translated in one word by his interpreter, manpower. And the minute he said that, my Secretary of Water Resources said, excuse me, can you explain what do you mean? We asked a question about water and how you tame a river. What does manpower have to do with it? And he said, look, this has been a river of sorrows for us, not just for decades or centuries.
Yes.
It has been a river of sorrows for us for millennia. And we were always trying to tame it, as you say. And we would do all sorts of things on it, interventions on it. We would spend money on it, time on it, energy on it. But we were doing it piecemeal. We would do something here, the river would go around it. We would do something there, the river would splash through it. Until we finally grasped that a river is a force of nature. It has a personality of its own.
Yes.
You cannot ever tame it. That is, you have to accept that fact. Can you train it? And we learned that you can train the river, but you have to train it simultaneously from the headwaters to the mouth, employing, and we used a manpower. We have no shortage of manpower. We just asked our people to pour along the two banks. We trained the entire river. River today, that same river still causes overflows and causes damage, but it is manageable. And suddenly, I call that, when I came face to face with epiphany. Okay, that river is within the national boundaries of China, all through from the headwaters to the mouth. our rivers on which our life depends is we have partitioned it into 3 or 4 segments. And within one segment, it has been partitioned into 5 sub-segments. How am I ever going to manage it unless we all talk to each other, sit with each other, recognize we all have a common problem and address it?
Okay, so let me interject that part into this with Professor Zhu. Professor Zhu, when we talk about river water sharing, has the traditional definition from just measuring Q6 and run of river and those conceptualizations, do they reflect ecological and environmental aspects, or is just about measuring water quantity and nothing else?
It is basically.
Yeah, so why don't we let Professor Zhu take that, sir?
It is basically the mindset is that how much did I get? How much was I shortchanged?
Right, Professor Zhu, if you take that, sir.
No, I mean, I think we share a lot of Asia wisdom. The water, it's we say water from heaven, but integrated into land. So my argument first with Asia wisdom, we needed to apply our holistic thinking from headwater to downstream watershed management, integration of heaven, land, and the human. So the second also about water, we needed to really look at the short-term action. In today's world, particularly in climate change, we face 2 major issues. Too much water causes the flash floods, too little water causes the drought. So people are struggling to face 2 phases of problem we needed to dealing with. The third also, we easy to see water pollution. I often say plant trees take 10 years to grow, but to rehabilitate polluted water take 20 years from an ecological point of view. So water easily get polluted, but not so easy to rehabilitate. So that's also, we needed to change mentality. The third, we often see the water is free from heaven. It's not. In the market economy, we needed to put a value on that. So water is not free because there's energy cost, there's transportation, there's rehabilitation, there's watershed management cost. So all we need to put on table, water is not free. So that's, I think, I like to argue. Finally, also in the water, energy, food nexus, and we needed to pay much attention. In today, not only is from food production point of view and the whole value chain point of view, we needed to put everything at interconnection for water management.
Okay, so what is hopeful about COP26 then? Because we know the problems, but what is hopeful? Do you see, is it the epitome, the fulcrum of ecological diplomacy? Would a forum like that be it, or should we be hunting for other kind of forums, perhaps at smaller levels, smaller multilateral levels, or bilateral levels, or maybe even national levels with some enlightened self-interest?
No, I mean, the COP26 is a global dialogue, and first, very clear to see for developed countries, the commitment is 2050 and for carbon neutral. Yeah. China put the 2060 as carbon neutral. Now, finally, India also officially committed 2070. You know, but you see what's the gradings actually 1 decade economic gap and how we're bridging the gap. For our mountain farmers, how to take opportunities to bridging those economic gap. And that means come to who going to pay those mountain farmers to manage ecosystem better, who actually have very little contribution to climate change. So that's the whole questions about the COP26 and beyond.
Okay, interesting that the people who, of course, will suffer the most, impact the climate the least, and are being asked to make the most amount of sacrifices, which is, of course, ironic. So let me pick up that thought with Ambassador Saran. Ambassador Saran, is it the epitome? Is it the hope of a major multilateral forum? Every country in the world pretty much comes on the plate, which of course, increases the level of complexity. But is it hopeful that it is the best chance we've had? Because, must have been in school when we started with the Kyoto Protocol in '97, and here we are. Do you think it's that epitome, the right way to go, the right organization, the right angle of looking at it?
I'm very glad that you went back to the Kyoto Protocol because if we take that as the benchmark, then what you see since then is really a journey of not rising expectations and rising ambition, but diminishing expectations and diminishing ambition. So I think we should be quite honest with ourselves. That 1992, the Rio Convention was perhaps the high point of a global approach to what was a global challenge, and the world did come together and on the basis of equity decided to tackle this problem. But since then there has been actually a diminishing kind of ambition. So if you ask me, was Glasgow very successful in meeting the challenge that we face? The simple answer to that is no. Because instead of actually raising the level of expectation, we have ended up with less ambition than before. Why do I say that? If we talk about net zero as the objective for 2050, most people do not realize that net zero is a balance sheet concept.
Yeah.
That is, you are not ending emissions. All that you are doing is to balancing the emissions by negative sort of emissions, by creating sinks like forests, for example, by making certain that perhaps there are technological fixes which will enable you to reduce the level of emissions. So it is not that by 2050 you have actually managed to really shift away from fossil fuel based growth to a non-fossil fuel renewable energy based growth, but that you can continue with that as long as you are able to somehow or the other come up with carbon sinks which can absorb the rising emissions. So this is very important to realize that this is creating an illusion that we have solved the emission problem. It is not solving the emission problem. That is so this is the first point I would like to make. Second thing is that with regard to the really fundamental problem that we have with respect to climate change, which is the world needs to make a rapid transition from a pattern of growth which is based on fossil fuels like coal, like oil, like gas, to a pattern of economic activity which is based more and more, progressively more and more, on renewable sources of energy, such as solar energy, and cleaner sources of energy, for example, your nuclear power or even hydropower. Unless you make that transition, you cannot deal with climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you look at COP26, what has it managed to do? It says that with respect to coal, which is admittedly a very important fossil fuel, you are going to start phasing down. You are going to start abating. You are not talking about getting rid of coal. Secondly, you have said not a word about oil and about gas, which may have less emission quality, but they are also fossil fuels. So if you are looking at it from that overall perspective of the scale of the challenge which we face, we have actually not gone very far.
So, Ambassador, where is the hope in this? Because like I said, I would have been 12 years old when Kyoto happened, 6 or 7 years old when Rio happened, and my hair turned gray now. So where is the hope in this? Is the hope at the extreme global multilateral COP27 level, or is it at national levels? Where is it? Where is the hope?
Let me say that any progress that you make in this particular area, which is so fundamental to human existence, we have to welcome that. So some progress has been made, and therefore it is something which we should welcome and try to work harder in the future. So, but we should not overestimate the value of what we have achieved. What to me is perhaps most encouraging, and which is not in the council chambers of the COP26, but what was happening outside the council chambers, where for the first time you had huge numbers of young people from the younger generation, young women, young men, not only in Glasgow, but in many other parts of the world, who were really getting mobilized and saying, you will not muck up our future. You have no right to, in fact, compromise our future, because you're not willing to really make the necessary changes that we will ensure that the world which we inherit will not be worse than the world that you have created.
Okay, so how do we translate that?
That is perhaps the only very major hopeful sign, not what happened within the council chambers.
Okay, so hope is in the youth, and that's literally billions of small decisions that need to be made that will change how we look at the world. We can transition quickly. Technology has taught us we can transition quickly. If I can quickly take this from a slightly different perspective, Dr. Dhawan, jump in on this, because when we talk about COP26 and the painfully slow progress, the reason it's painfully slow is because when you talk about historical emissions and equity and fairness and my development versus your development. I mean, the Americans, even under a different administration, they don't want to give up on shale gas, just as we don't want to give up on coal. But bringing it back to what we have in the ecologically preserved areas, with the Eastern Himalayas, we can argue are as important as the Amazon rainforest. Where is the room for diplomacy? How do we create it? Or should we say that, okay, diplomacy is not the most fructuous thing. We need to set up national programs. How do we set up that paradigm in this area when we talk about what we learned from COP26?
Yeah, COP26, of course, that I'll call it a place for negotiation. It is commitments, which in a way shows us that this is the way the country would like to go. It is not action oriented. As you rightly said, there is too much of talk with very little action, and you are talking of Kyoto and other protocols, and it is very slow. But what change we have seen, and where I see that perhaps we are going to move much faster, is that earlier we said climate change is a threat, but now we know that it is actual. And that is where the youths are becoming very active and responsible. So they want to say, and they are asking questions to our generation, what have you done to the climate? Now, when we say diplomacy, it is essential part of it. Because see, what is happening is it's not a blame game that we start blaming China and Pakistan starts blaming us in terms of availability of water in the rivers. It is that we all have to conserve this planet. It is not that India is telling the glaciers to melt. We can't do that. We are not doing it. It is happening on its own because of the climate change, and therefore India is equally responsible as Pakistan. And similarly, water in Brahmaputra, it is not China which is controlling it. So therefore, we have to find solutions together. And that is where diplomacy is going to play a very important role.
What is the track record, ma'am? Because it's very, very vexatious, solving problems in which economics, livelihoods, cross-boundary natural defense. I mean, if you take the Brahmaputra, which is what Ambassador Karim was talking about, the end point being in Bangladesh, but the beginning point going from Tibet, through into Assam, through India. We know that the river building projects that every country is taking along the route. So when we're saying painfully slow, there are some issues here like border disputes, etc. We haven't been able to solve in 60, 70 years. Where is the hope in this, that the imperative, like maybe a COVID gave us a global imperative that we can work together to solve things?
That's right. So COVID has taught us many things. And another important lesson is that what happens in one part of the globe is definitely going to have impact on the other part. Yes, today we are worried about South African variant, but that is not, and I'm sure it's not going to remain restricted over there. Now, when I talk of water, it is that maybe short-term gains countries can make, but if they want to look 10 years ahead, then it is that it is equally important for them to ensure that livelihoods in Bangladesh also flourishes, and so in Pakistan and in India and so on. And that is where we also have to find solutions together. It is not one country which can find
Okay, so how much of the solution, Dr. Dhawan, is in preserving what we already have? And how do we preserve it if we don't ascribe a value to it? We think that a forest it's worth nothing until you cut it down, and then it's worth something. So in preserving what we have, how much of a ecological, environmental value is there, ma'am?
Yeah, fortunately, that's not the case, because forest can actually become your way of livelihood. Because what we are also looking at, carbon sinks as the forest. So carbon credits you can earn by afforestation and maintaining your forests very well. And it is across border, because even a company in United States can pay to a well-managed forest in India for that purpose. And also the solutions, they are going to come from the nature. So earlier, of course, I'll say even 5 years back, it was, what do you get from a particular species? But today it is as a whole, how much of CO2 you can fix in the forest. And the other thing is that there is realization that without forest, without a healthy forest, you cannot have ecological balance, whether it is your water cycle or soils and so on.
Yes.
So that is where it is that for the survival, the ecological security perhaps is as important.
Okay, so let me just explore this point a little bit further. Ranjit, you've been doing extensive work on exactly this, on changing the approach. The approach thus far was that a natural asset was worth nothing until you could build a factory or a mine on top of it. And we don't have time now. And if we further denude what we've already got, that clock, as Ambassador Karim has pointed out, heads to midnight much faster. So what we've got, where in the room for all of this is the preservation of that?
I think it's very simple at one level. It's complex for implementation. The reality is, if I had 100 square kilometers of buildings and flats, there would be a value to it.
Yes.
Now I have 100 square kilometers of forest. There is no value to it. So what we've done is we have created financial asset classes out of forest. So just basic. So suppose there's bamboo, and we cut the bamboo and we get 30 rupees of bamboo for it, and there are million bamboo. That is the value of that bamboo forest. Or if it's not monoculture, as it shouldn't be, we've got a forest asset class coming. We further divided that into 4 different segments. One is the segment of medicinal asset class. One is the segment of house and household asset class. One is of fruits and food asset class and medicines. And the third one is, fourth one is that of just an asset class for tourism, meaning just for people to live, and biodiversity and how you want to do it. If that's the first bucket of financial asset management, the second bucket is, how do you add value? So let's take the bamboo example, and we take bamboo and convert it into floors or roofs or housing material or clothes. That becomes a second cut of a financial asset class. So the first asset class is the raw material. Second asset class is the value that you get from all those 4 segments. The next asset class is, what do you actually do, what they talk about ecosystem services. How do they actually talk about the water, the rain, the soil, etc., which they're currently talking about ecosystem services.
Yes.
The total of these 3 is actually what you call an asset class, for which you should be able to give a bank in today's world for mortgage and actually do all the developmental activities, if not living activities, such as social sciences, such as healthcare, the entire process of education. There's no reason why we're not doing it. And in fact, recently on a discussions with Nick Stern and London School of Economics and Yale, they said actually they should have this value so that we take it forward. So that is one. So I think carbon and all are just part of it. There's a minuscule part of it, that value. But the real value of the forest is asset class management. We have to use the language of capitalists who've actually destroyed.
Okay, so let me pick up that time, because I know I have to free Ambassador Karim very, very quickly. So I'll take a last question with him on this. Ambassador Karim, you're talking about a good example of the mangrove forest, and you're right. The point when I was studying about the Sundarbans to where they are now, 20, 30 years later, has changed, and the impact on coastal areas on India's west coast, you can literally see the change as you go year to year. where now, of course, coastal highway is being built. So the mangrove is completely gone. So in the preservation, while we are talking about, generally when we talk about climate change, we're thinking that, okay, we'll shift from coal to solar. In the preservation of what we've got, where is the opportunity there in what we have in Bangladesh, in the northeast of India, in the southeast of China?
One quick point about the Sundarbans. I've been doing a study on that in my center here. Since 1757 or somewhere, we saw a map. I've compared it with what, how that topography has changed. We have lost about more than 50% of what used to be there. Mm-hmm. That's simply creeping annexation by humans moving in because they need more land, they're doing cultivation, this, that, and the other. So it is, and of course, with the partition, we partitioned the Sundarbans. You know, this is the point which I want to register. The ecosystem is not subservient to man-made Westphalian concepts and laws. They have their own laws. They will not adjust to how we partition them. We have to adjust to their laws, to the natural laws. Nobody gets that right. Number two, what do we have to do? You know, that was why Bangladesh has been and is still championing the cause of basin management, where you treat the whole basin and the watershed holistically. Okay. Because everything plays into everything else. You can't touch one aspect and leave another out. The third, the point made earlier about you know, transitioning away from coal, particularly. The argument we are making, and I think Shyam would agree, is that, look, at the moment, this is the quickest way for us to get energy to run our industries and to run our economy. We in Bangladesh, the potentials of solar and wind are limited. The problem is nobody has been talking or touching the subject of hydro energy, which is possibly we can tap, and they could be anywhere between 100 to 250,000 megawatts. It now depends on how the statistics will be played and how actually human habitation in those areas where you have to dam water will affect the calculations now, 40 years later. So if we could somehow, but that will happen only if we are cooperating with each other on a regional basis. That is not happening. We started this initiative several years ago, then it suddenly halted. It took 2 years before it picked up again. Then it's again halted because basically every time it starts, some political factor, which is largely domestic in one or the other, intervenes and brings everything to a grinding halt. Okay, and so unless we can cross that hurdle first, we are just talking airy-fairy. You know, I mean, what has happened since the last COP meeting? What has happened to all the targets set there? How much money has actually flowed from what was committed? Almost, you know, which sectors have they affected? So, you know, be real. And I don't see us actually going real. We are all making compromises to make sweet words and nice declarations, which fits everybody can go back feeling happy that he has got something. But is it translating actually to the mitigation of the actual problem and sort of pacifying Mother Nature, which all of us together collectively have angered so much?
Okay, so I know I have to let you go, sir. So I'm going to thank you for joining us in this conversation.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
your
much.
time. Thanks very much. Let me pick up on the same thought with Professor Zhu. Professor Zhu, when we say we're getting real, right? Here is an ecological bastion. I know the globe talks about, you know, the Amazon basin as the natural carbon sink. But within all our countries and in the intervening region of all our countries, we have these ecological bastions. Perhaps they've remained ecological bastions because they are on the intervening region of our country, where development for various reasons have been secure and it's been difficult to access. But we only understand value that if there is a mountain, its value is only in the resources once you build a mine there. If there is a forest, the value is only when you cut it down. How do we understand value in preservation?
I mean, the value now, the nice things about COP26 now finally put carbon as a value. And in China, my city just complete CBD COP15, and then we'll talk about biodiversity. Now, in the water also, we try to put a value on that. So we want to talk about ecosystem services. It's the bundle of values put together. So if people appreciate the biological species with carbon and water together, plus other services, the spiritual, the cultural value. And so these, you know, I don't expect too much politician commitment and how much weight down put into action. Today, so all different international negotiations, CBD and COP26, it's about awareness. Finally, people, everything realize the single practice, there's a value of, for instance, how to manage the land, how to do circular agriculture, how to do sustainable agriculture. So that's today's world. So today's action, if we put Amazon as a whole, it's not a carbon sink. Now it's become carbon emission because it's a very bad land management because of our industry, because of our, you know, improper land management. But the action is should from individual. So that's why our mountain farmers show the very good way of traditional management can be scaling up at a larger scale, at regional level, and at basin level, and as a continental level. So
okay, but how do we do that? Because if we look at traditional mountain farming, right, most people would tell that mountain farmer that you could increase if you put this fertilizer and this pesticide, or if you got a diesel pump to increase. So this is how you would increase your yield. So the fact that the farmer is not doing that, that is sticking to traditional methods, how are then, is the carbon trading way to do it? What is the way to do it? Have we developed a mechanism?
Yes, we need to put the whole entire marketing value chain on that to educate on our consumers. The problem now, our marketing mechanism doesn't work. People appreciate, I like to get the cheapest coffee, you know, who produce the, you know, the largest scale, the cheaper. So today's supermarket, you go to the large quantity, we pay less. So people don't differentiate the value of land management, the value of traditional farmer. So that's so today we talk about public awareness. We need to educate our consumer from market end. The solution is not from rural farmers, mountain farmers, it's from public and the consumer end.
Okay, so Ambassador Saran, just jump in on this, because we're talking about net zero commitments. And as you very rightly said, net zero commitments is not about eliminating emissions. Maybe, hopefully one day we do, but we are nowhere near that. It's going to be about basic things, that what we already have, what's left, how do we preserve it? In the very few regions, you know, that are generally naturally forested, which don't have dense populations, and which for various geographical and geopolitical reasons are natural reserves. How do we preserve something like the Eastern Himalayas?
So I think a lot of the work which Nature and Economics and Balipara Foundation has been doing is to really see how can we make eco-services, like, for example, eco-services which are provided by virgin forests, or eco-services which are provided by just having clean water, or eco-services which are provided by what Ambassador Karim mentioned, the value of mangrove forests, like in the Sundarbans. I know, how do we have an accounting system which reflects the value of these ecological services? Because I think you yourself pointed out that if a tree which is growing in the forest has less value than a tree which has been cut down and is being sold as timber, don't be surprised if forests are cut down. So you have to have an accounting system which does two things. One, it properly values what the marketable value of ecological services is, and secondly, uses a discount rate which in fact values the future relatively more than what the present is. Because the present discount rate which you are using gives far greater value to your present consumption, but not to what happens in the future. Which is why I mentioned the young.
Is it possible? So, for example, if I have a few acres of land, okay, and and right now I'm talking to a property developer, and he says, okay, if you build these apartments or build a holiday resort, you can unlock so much value.
Right.
Can we see a future where actually somebody comes and tells me, if you rewild this land, you can unlock equal, if not more value?
Yes, but that can be only done at a community level, not from the individual's viewpoint. From an individual's viewpoint, it may still make sense to convert this piece of land into real estate development and not leave it as it is, or to maybe plant a forest there. That is also a possibility, isn't it? That you actually contribute to the carbon sink by converting your 1 acre of land into a community forest. So that is something where the state has to come in, because it is through the state that these what are known as external economies, that is, it is not of value to a single individual, but it is of value to the whole community. Now, the value to the whole community can only be determined at the level of the community as a whole, which is the state.
Yes.
After all, the state provides you, for example, with security services, police service, because each one of us trying to get a security guard is simply not worthwhile in economic terms.
Correct.
So you have to use the same approach here, that there are ecological services where the value to the whole community is much more than the value to a single individual.
Okay, so how do we inject this into not only a thought process, but actually do accounting that, okay, we measure the land, we do the accounting. So then we say, okay, we have these many billions of dollars of natural assets in the Eastern Himalayas shared between these countries. And those then can be leveraged through capital markets and through normal forces that you can borrow against them, etc.
So there are many new concepts which have come up. Like, for example, there is now a fairly vibrant green bond market, which is precisely doing that. I mean, of valuing natural assets in a manner that can actually be marketed in the financial markets. Now, so there are some innovative kind of, innovative financial products, innovative financial practices which are being used. But, the fact is that it is not of a scale that, in fact, responds to the challenge which we are.
So, we have realized something that, we are, Dr. Dhawan, there was a time when, nobody wanted to pay for internet music. Okay, finish your thought, Master, and then I'll ask a question. Go ahead, Master.
No, what I was trying to point out is, you had also mentioned, and I think Ms. Dhawan also mentioned the experience with the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. Actually, you see, the COVID-19 pandemic is proving to you the dangers of not being able to come up with a global solution. Because even if one person is infected, the whole world is still unsafe. COVID-19 recognizes no national boundaries. COVID-19 recognizes no regional boundaries. And nobody is safe unless everybody is safe. So this particular pandemic will remain with you unless we are able to, for example, vaccinate much larger numbers of people, say in Africa. But only 4% of the people in Africa are vaccinated. Why is that so? Because we are approaching this, what is a global challenge, through national means. Every country is trying to find its own national solutions to this, not recognizing that this is a global challenge and needs
Yes.
a global response.
I think that's point. The point is exactly well made, but
it is the same thing that applies to climate change or to the environment.
Okay, so let me pick up. Okay, so let me pick up what Professor Yu said. There is a set of people. I was mentioning an example. You know, there were about 10 years ago, nobody wanted to pay for MP3 music. Okay, and now we are all willing to pay for it. We're willing to pay for content which is streaming to us. You know, many people think the music industry will die, the film industry will die. So things have changed. Similarly, there are people who are willing to pay a premium for ethically sourced sustainable products. Coffee. Sure. I mean, now I can see the bamboo water bottles have come out.
Just look at the market for organic products.
Exactly. So as sustainable, you know, we do a lot of work.
So it is, you have examples which show to you that this is marketable.
Okay, so what is the lesson here, Dr. Dhawan, in then preserving the asset on the simple economics of me understanding? I own a plot of land, okay? If I build a hotel on that land, I can unlock a value. If I can plant trees on that land, how can I unlock the value? Or if I own untouched land, it's a hillock I own, okay? And it's untouched forest land. Can I borrow against it on the basis of the fact that it's wide land and therefore it has value?
Yeah, the point I wanted to make few other points as well. And when we are talking of sustainability, and very rightly said that the farmer wants to get more yields and therefore that's what the practices he's following. But somewhere we are also missing on the importance, what the practices which is followed by him, what impact it has on the climate, on water use, natural resource management, and so on. And rightly mentioned that we should also have another label, not the organic, it can also be sustainably produced. And let's see whether people are willing to pay a price for that. And like the old practices, conservation agriculture, we have to relook what kind of machines are required so that we can afford it in a sustainable way. Now, coming to the other point, that the value, of course, it is fast gain if you go for a real estate project, but at the same time, forestry is for your next generations.
Yeah, but
that's somewhere apart, because
that's where we get lost. We get lost in theory, you know. So,
so then apart from carbon, I'll say the carbon credits you get on your forest, what's the harm? Government should give money. It should, or it is the duty of the government, it is the duty of every citizen, put a tax on every citizen, the petroleum tax. So part of it should go towards maintaining forest, agroforestry. The answer to what all we are saying, we have to preserve this planet if the human race has to survive.
Okay.
And for that, the part of your cess can actually go towards maintaining forests and so on. And new practices so that you increase productivity of the forest. You give agroforestry to the farmer, conservation agriculture, how they can proceed. And in fact, there was a study done by TERI where we have shown that the natural-based solutions, if followed properly, they could account for 1/3 of the solutions for climate change and can provide $170 billion worth of benefits in ecosystem services by 2030. And this was a study done by
ecosystem. So what's an ecosystem service?
Ecosystem service is everything, whether it is your water cycle, whether it is CO2 fixation, whether it is giving you medicines, natural medicines from the plants, nature-based solutions. During the pandemic, it is that perhaps the immunity of Indians was very strong. And we all were, I'll call it. So ecosystem, it's also a service to the humankind.
Okay, so let me just approach this from a similar angle, you know, then let's move forward in this conversation. Professor Zhu, a lot of these areas which I mentioned, you know, which are, you know, on the Tibetan plateau and in the Himalayas, we consider in our countries underdeveloped areas, because our understanding of development is, does it have roads, does it have buildings, does it have power, does it have airports? So these are considered poorer, underdeveloped areas, and our traditional logic says the more the roads you build, the more developed the area becomes, the more the industry you build, the more the mining you do, the more developed the area becomes. Is there a tipping point where we can say that actually in an ecological sense, these are highly developed areas and have a value that a road which will actually hurt, a dam will actually hurt, an airport will actually hurt?
I mean, in China, and we have very strong socio-economic linkage or mutual help system between East Coast and the West Mountain region. And my region, and now what I sit in my office, it's built by Shanghai municipality. They take responsibility of entire Yunnan province or East Himalaya for not only how to say scientifically, but also economically, and also to help infrastructural development. And so social responsibility, once certain people reach a certain living standard, need to look after those under the poverty. That's our Chinese philosophy. And so that's the whole links. And that's similarly also, and today, yesterday, in China, Africa, we just have a huge dialogue, and we have a huge commitment to help Africa brothers, sisters to get out of poverty, restore the ecosystem, and to get rid of the COVID. And we donate 1 billion in the new vaccine, and also to build the infrastructure.
Yeah, but that's where it's complicated, because in the end you have to do the mining, and the cobalt has to come from Africa for your lithium cobalt batteries, and it has sociological problems, geopolitical problems, and of course environmental problems. So there's a thinking logic to change. So let me just boil it down to that simple question. What we have in the Eastern Himalayas potentially is no less than having an oil reserve in Saudi Arabia, that there is a value to what is already lying there. The value need not be only when it is tapped, which is when the forest is stripped and the mountains are mined. There is a value in keeping it as it is. How do we preserve the Eastern Himalayas, keeping this sort of valuation logic in mind?
I think it's a whole CBD COP15 discussion whether can we protect 30% of our entire ecosystem. Or, or scientists try to argue we need to protect what's called 50%. Now, my Yunnan province, we already have 68% of forest cover, and who pay for that? And so that's also, ambassador already said that's a national policy needed on that, and we need ecological security and for mountain people, and there's a payment from the central government, and also payment from the market, and particularly, so China and Alibaba and all your purchase, you suppose a certain percent goes to the plant trees. We call ant forest in the desert, Gobi Desert. So that's get the afforestation going, and that's also. That's an individual donation, and particularly to help the products, and so all products produced by my farmers here can selling to Shanghai with 20% high.
Okay, with a premium, 20% premium. Okay, Ranjit, I see you. I'm just coming to you in a second. Ambassador Saran, are we realizing that there is an economic premium we're willing to pay? I know several of us would pay an economic premium to leave Delhi for these 2 weeks and go somewhere where we can breathe fresh air, which has an economic value. We are beginning to pay economic premiums. You mentioned for organic and sustainable products. Like I can see bamboo water bottles that are now available, which are not cheap. So is that mindset shift already starting? And then I'll ask Ranjit ji how we leverage it. Do you see it happening?
Yes, there is no doubt that shift is taking place, and perhaps this shift is going to accelerate as the awareness that you are talking about begins to really take hold. The problem really, Rishabh, is that the pace of this change, that is the attitudinal change that you are talking about, is simply not rapid enough to really make a difference in terms of the kind of climate emergency that we are confronting.
Okay, so what is missing? Ambassador, why am I, for example, willing to have 1 lakh rupees worth of air purifiers in my house, but not understand the larger context? Why is that still happening? Because I'm willing to pay an economic price for what is happening, right?
Yes, because very simply, buying a air filter is within your individual control. So you are saying, I'm only an individual. What can I do about this larger problem of air pollution that is, pervading the skies all over India? That is simply beyond my, control. So let me try and do what I can do within my control, and which is
look after
going ahead
myself, which is either leave or wear a mask or something.
Yeah, I pay airfare and I go to a place which has relatively cleaner air.
Yeah.
The question here is that there are some things, as I mentioned to you, which can only be handled at the community level or handled at the global level, which an individual's attitude is important. But the action has to come at a much larger scale.
Okay, so how do we tap into it? We wear masks today because of COVID, but there was a time when we wear N95 masks because of pollution.
Quite right, because you were faced with a crisis. You got shaken out of your comfort zone, and therefore you had to do this. Now the question is, how do I get people to really be so much shaken out of their comfort zone that they bring about a change in our lifestyles, without which you cannot solve this problem?
No, but let me then delve into the economic level. Then I want to get Ranjit.
I want to just make the last point here that you have to change your attitude in terms of how do we relate to nature, because so far, as you mentioned, cut down a forest and create a mine. This is because you have a adversarial relationship with nature. The whole industrial revolution was what? You must tame nature, you must harness nature, you must conquer nature. So you put yourself apart from nature and you talk about nature as if it is a dark force which has to be conquered. What you have to realize is that your own existence is not possible, cannot be sustained, unless you treat yourself as part of nature.
Okay, and maybe as you mentioned, if you give us the options, then people can make the decision. So
absolutely, they can make but you have to have a change in attitudes. So this is where going back to something which is very integral to Indian culture. In India, you have traditionally treated nature as a mother, right?
Yeah.
As a source of nurture.
Okay, but in practical things, I'll just give you a small example. This is it's a wooden comb. So there are efforts to give up on plastic. Ranjit ji, we were discussing in just the interim period that there is a generation out there, and I think we are part of it. I'm not talking about generation divide. All of us who are willing to now pay a premium for organic and sustainable, are willing to buy disposable plates that are biodegradable rather than plastic ones. And there is a generation who has grown up that we understand that we need to worry about air pollution and these kind of things, and are willing to then pay the cost of that. How do we give the people the option then to say that, okay, if you're willing to pay 30,000 rupees for an air purifier, during the rest of the year, that 30,000 rupees buys you the preservation of an ecological asset somewhere far from home?
You see, I think all this, the points that have been made by Sue, by Vibha, and by Ambassador Saran are all related. And actually, it's a 360-degree human life situation right now, which means that unless your mindset is changed and unless you actually want to go in a certain direction, you can't. In fact, last year, Rishabh, if you remember, one of the things that we did, and also with the Niti Aayog, when we talked to them and talked about the Prime Minister, we said, unless the Prime Minister of the country, whether it's China, India, or America, or wherever, stands up and says, this is the ecological budget and value of our country at the beginning of the year. Now, our finance minister will present the economic and financial budget. Unless we move into that mindset of actually leading with ecological right in the front, it will never happen. For example, I also believe that what Professor Partha Dasgupta has done is a seminal work in terms of what is called economics of biodiversity. He's launched this book last year, and I think all of you may have read it or seen it, that economics of biodiversity, and therefore COP15 was very important. And we were going to actually play a role in terms of talking about the valuation of nature and the whole issue around valuation, which would change that mindset. See, that mindset won't change because we are so tuned for now in this industrial revolution for 200-300 years of saying material good is better, brighter, faster
Okay,
change.
so let me translate that, Ranjit ji. When do you see the ability that I can go to a bank and say, I own 2 acres of hill land and I want to grow trees on it, and the bank, and I want to loan, and the bank manager won't laugh at me, he'll take me seriously. Oh, that makes sense. You should do it because that's the right thing to do.
I think within the next 5 years, that is going
Okay.
to happen globally. I definitely think it's going to happen. And in fact, not only will it be happen, but it will also say that it has to be a biodiverse forest. It cannot be a monoculture forest of only growing cedar or teak wood or teak plantation. It has to be biodiverse. There must be 21 different species or 2 million species. There has to be the following structure in the whole thing. So I think they will say that these are the preconditions of the loan, and that's
okay. So is it real, Dr. Dhawan? If you told my parent generation that you'll have to buy water in a plastic bottle, they would have laughed at you. But it's become ubiquitous now. If you told me 5 years ago that you would have to have air purifiers in your house, it would have been laughable. So have we changed enough to understand that tomorrow we can go to a bank and say that I actually just want to grow nothing on my land? And therefore it has value. So now you give me a loan.
Well, Ranjit sounded very optimistic, and I hope it comes true.
Okay, you think bankers are going to be a bit more circumspect?
Because the problem is that everyone's responsibility becomes no one's responsibility.
Yeah.
So but at the same time, I'm very optimistic, because what is happening is that the present generation is far more responsible than us. And they value, and also COVID has taught them one thing, and that is the sky can be green. And you can see birds outside your house and so on, the things which we were missing otherwise. So therefore, they know the value that they need a cleaner planet. The other is last 1 year, the kind of tragedies we had, whether it was flooding in Germany, New York, forest fires, Uttarakhand. The only bad, or what the tragedy again is, that those who haven't contributed to the climate change, they are the ones who are suffering the most. And therefore, those who have done the sin, they are still not affected. What we actually require is awareness. And I'll say right from the school level, college, the youth, they have to play a far important role than what they are playing today. And the other is that the developed world must recognize that without imparting training to the developing countries, and when we say India still have to build 2/3 of infrastructure, and really speaking, if we want to become a developed economy, we really have to industrialize, and no one can stop us.
No, but maybe we need to provide awareness, because awareness has been happening for a long period of time. I remember doing this in school. But it's
we
also
were not giving
opportunity.
solutions. See, when you say don't buy plastic, where is the alternative? So you also have
so you need to provide opportunity and therein lies the economic opportunities. Professor Zhu wants to make an interjection. Professor Zhu, go ahead.
Now, I think it's a two-way to protect nature. And the British professor and Andrew Bamford talk about land sharing, land sparing and approach. Both are work, and Ranjit tried to say we use land sharing and share responsibility, look at tree, another land sparing. And by my group now really look at the biosynthesis and how we produce food from industrial level. And my Chinese Academy of Sciences just use carbon dioxide to synthesize the starch, And my Chinese Academy of Agricultural Science just use CO2, use bacteria to synthesize they produce protein and for large scale. So those kind of technical innovation really can protect nature from other end.
Okay, so part of it is going back to tradition, and part of it, of course, solution is going to be technology. I think we have consensus on that. Okay, we've only got 15 minutes left, so let me just address the last part of this conversation. Ambassador Saran, let me trouble you on this once again. Do we have the systems now? We're talking about the multilateral systems. That COP26 is vexatious. We have bilateral mechanisms on water sharing. Do we have through the existing organizations and treaty agreements, systems in place to tackle this? If we don't, what do we need to create?
So my view is that the systems are in place. You know, the multilateral institutions are there. The rules of the game have also been put down. What is really missing is the political kind of will that must be brought to bear in order to deliver results. What do I mean by that? If say I've been a diplomat, I have been negotiating, for example, on climate change. What is the brief which is given to me by my government? My brief is, please go and give as little as possible and you extract as much as you can.
Yeah.
Every delegation has the same brief, right?
Correct.
Now, if all the delegations are negotiating with one another on the basis of that brief, would you be surprised if you came out with a least common denominator result? Because that's the only thing that you can get a consensus on.
Yeah.
The least that each one of us can agree upon. What this does not address is the fact that we are facing a challenge which requires maximal responses, not minimal responses. So what does it mean? It means that every delegate should actually be given a brief which says, try to contribute as much as you can and try to, not to try to extract as much as possible. It is only if you have that different mindset with which you go to the negotiations, can there be hope of getting a solution which really corresponds to the scale of the challenge which we are facing. So this is a political issue. This is not an issue of, are the institutions really appropriate to this challenge or not? Is there some problem with respect to the fact that we are dealing with this multilaterally, not bilaterally or regionally? That is not the issue here. The issue really is that the way in which we, for example, deal with trade negotiations, where this is the normal way of trying to reach agreement. That does not work as far as these kind of challenges are concerned. And lastly, since you are talking about the Eastern Himalayas, let me also then apply the same principle that as far as, say, the mountains are concerned in the Eastern Himalayas, you cannot deal with the challenges that are cropping up in dealing with the Eastern Himalayas by only yourself as India. Unless you are able to collaborate together with China in the north, with Bhutan, with Nepal, how do you deal with this issue? Okay. So it is something which, first of all, there has to be a recognition that we are living in a ecologically integrated space. It is not a property issue that we chop up, as Tariq Karim said, this is not something that you can chop up into little pieces and say, okay, I will manage my little piece. Don't you dare come and talk about my little piece here. So this is something which, unless we change the manner in which we deal with these issues, whether we are talking about the Eastern Himalayas, whether we are talking about the entire Himalayan chain, whether we are talking about the seas around, the Indian subcontinent, or we are talking about, the monsoons which affect all the lives of all our people in this living in the subcontinent. These are issues, at least in the regional space, you need to be able to
all easier said than done, because you can't then tell somebody that don't put a mine there or don't build a road here or an airport here. It's very, very difficult. So I don't want to sugarcoat it and honey glaze it and say it's going to be very easy. It's going to be difficult. But if there is an economic value to it, maybe the argument becomes more self-sustaining. Ranjit ji, do the mechanisms exist? Ambassador Saran says, yes, they exist. It's not about creating another organization or having 5 more people in a room. There are enough people to do that. It's about having the right approach. Is that the problem, or do we need to create something specific for this region?
No, I think I'll answer that in 2 parts. One is I cannot disagree with Shyam when he says it's a political issue. This is not an issue of whether the institutions exist. I'm saying our Institute of Botany in India versus Kunming Institute, the existence is there for the Eastern Himalayas. The question is that politically, unless we actually say, and he explained it so well, you can't divide up the Eastern Himalayas and say, this is yours, this is mine, now Bhutan, you look after this. cannot happen. So it is a political issue. But let me just give it a macro dynamic situation to understand that all human beings actually try to go for a direction. So post Bretton Woods, what people did was, let's go to a direction of good GDP. Let's say that, look, these are the social delivery items which the UN has picked up, and say this is education, this is healthcare. What happens is, if you look at it, we were hunter-gatherers, just condense the word, hunter-gatherers, agriculture people. From that, we moved on to technology, primarily driven by energy and primarily driven by the steam revolution, which made on to technology, which became the better, brighter, faster, cheaper mantra, which ended up in fertilizers and pesticides as a link to everything, to say that we want more output and more delivery. And therefore, we wanted to do that. So it's agriculture, it's technology. The third part is actually from technology, the digital revolution that we are in today, which includes MI and AI. This MI and AI are the revolution that is taking us forward. Now, the next big horizon, if the world has to go, if we have not achieved GDP or MMI and IMR, we are now moving towards the ecological revolution. In fact, actually, China and Professor, Zhu will bear me out on this. Xi Jinping actually made this comment many years ago, saying that the ecological revolution is the next one. We, in a small way, have talked about the naturenomics revolution, where the valuation is both. The ecological revolution has to perforce have value. And that value today, the only thing we understand is that value, we can't measure it. But like you, Rishabh, said, we have value of water, which we never knew when we went to class 1, right? We just went to the tap. We had value of oxygen, which we didn't understand till now. You can go to an oxygen bar. So I think things are changing, and the ecological revolution, if we have the yardsticks of what we want there and that direction, we will definitely be able to achieve it. That's at the 40,000.
Okay, so let's distill that. Just a few minutes left. I'll leave last words with everybody. Ranjit, thank you for joining us. Vibha, I'll leave the last word with you, ma'am. Let me get to Professor Zhu. Professor Zhu, do the mechanisms exist? You are a person who is part of these mechanisms, studying this both internally within China and, of course, with a global perspective. Do we need, if we look at this region, particularly the Eastern Himalayas, and the conjunction of very complicated histories and laid by different empires, do we need some mechanism, or are you of the same opinion that the mechanisms exist, the institutes exist, we need greater direction and a sense of purpose?
I think nature provides a solution, and I used to be based in Kathmandu, working for ISMOD. My first trip to Northeast India, 2006. Compare that time, the socio-economic situation and the ecological situation much worse than today. Now, 15 years passed. I see the Northeast India, Southwest China, my province, and Nepal. The environmental situation getting better. The living standards rise up. Of course, we're still facing the poverty, and the different countries face different challenge. I believe we have better future if we're working together. We cannot create artificial mechanism from the people, from social movement. Of course, we need a top-down from our top leader and the political design. But I believe the grassroots solution still the best.
Okay. So then what is the, is it top down? Dr. Dhawan, take your last thoughts on this. Is it top down, or is it going to be bottom up? In the end, it's about the people. Policy can achieve as much if we can be told that, brush only for this with this much water, but until we apply it, it doesn't matter.
I'll say.
Yeah, Professor Zhu, if you want to finish your thought, then I'll go to Dr. Dhawan. Professor Zhu, go ahead, finish your thoughts.
Yeah, I think we need both, top down and bottom up. With two without each other, it's very difficult to achieve. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Dhawan.
Yeah, I agree with him completely, because if you make legislations, unless and until the others follow, you cannot implement them. And it can only be implemented when every citizen, every stakeholders find benefit in it, and which is rightly communicated to him. I agree, we do have a mechanism, but that mechanism is extremely weak. We talk of CBD, but has CBD correlated with the climate change? The answer is no. So we also need to provide, I should say, knowledge-based policy decisions that needs to be taken. A lot of studies are to be done. Research will play an integral part, and also sharing of knowledge across international boundaries, coupled with diplomacy. That is what is required if we really want to have this planet sustain human population.
Okay, so what, Ambassador, last thought on this conversation. What is then the future of ecological diplomacy? Is it now limited or will be limited to when we meet again in Egypt and hope for some progress? Or do you see some momentum shift, hopefully?
My view is that today we are actually at a point where it is very difficult to treat climate change in a separate box, biodiversity in a separate box, finance in a separate box. All of these things have become interconnected. So to give you an example, if we are talking about, say, dealing with the public health crisis of the pandemic, don't forget that this is very closely related to biodiversity loss. It is because the bats in the forest have come more and more in contact with, domesticated animals, and then the virus has jumped from the animals to the human population that we are facing this crisis. So it is habitat loss of the wild species that is also a cause of this particular pandemic. So all these things are getting interconnected. So you have had, like Professor Shu mentioned, we had the biodiversity convention, COP in Kunming in November. And then we have had, the COP 26 in Glasgow. But the issues that were being looked at the biodiversity conference were all connected together with the climate change conference. So I think going forward, what you need is to try and see whether in terms of the international negotiations, we can interconnect these different facets of what is actually a common challenge. Once you start doing that, then, the interconnections, then the sort of trade-offs between different sectors then become easier to handle. At the current moment, we are still following a kind of a siloed approach, which is no longer appropriate to the kind of challenges which we are facing. Okay. So going forward, more multilateral negotiations are required, but perhaps in a way that brings different facets of the challenge together.
Okay. These things will happen when leaderships in our countries, all of our respective countries, find it politically expedient, because the pulse of the people tells them that this is now touching their lives in a very, very egregious fashion. It can only work when it makes an economic sense. What makes economic sense is our interpretation of what our growth and progress is. Unless we ascribe a value to what we already have, we will not be able to put into traditional conceptualizations of how a GDP works, the preservation of our natural assets. We will not be able to reach the culmination of where carbon trading was supposed to be, where it's not reached despite more than a decade of effort. And we will not understand that a standing tree has a value while it's standing, not only when it's chopped down. I think a lot of people watching the broadcast, hopefully right across the globe, and of course here in India, here's an opportunity, a young generation out there. We're seeing fintech booms and so much booms happening in the startup space, maybe carbon trading and green bonds and these kind of trading platforms where somebody maybe sitting in the Eastern Himalayas in an Indian state can say that, look, I have a forested area and here's a photograph, okay? Come for ecological tourism, which is sustainable, buy my products, which are sustainable, or let me borrow of you to create a sustainable business environment, because I don't want to build a resort here by chopping down all the trees. Maybe there's a future, an answer and hope in all of that. There is always hope. And the hope generally lies in thinking that we can build a better future. My many thanks to Professor Zhu, Ambassador Saran, Dr. Dhawan, of course, Ranjit ji, Ambassador Karim, for joining us, and for all of you watching. We take a break. Thanks very much.